Okay, it's recording.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Let me see if I can get my presentation to launch. There it is. Okay. Well, welcome to the December 2021. We made it to the end of 2021, everybody. Congratulations. And here we are at the December Hawk meeting. We are part of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation, the first chapter that got started about 15, 16 years ago from a bunch of dedicated environmental gardeners. And we got started over at Squirrel Lake Park. Here is an older picture of Squirrel Lake Park with Rachel tending some of those bushes that we planted. So most of this is native gardening, native plants, and we could always use some help. So if you feel like having a little green thumb action helping over at Squirrel Lake Park, we've got several plants, several parks now with that could certainly use some help, mostly invasive plant removal, which is a problem everywhere, not just in your own yard, but certainly in our parks. And I'm sure Lenny can speak to that quite extensively a little later on tonight.
Yeah.
Like I said, we started a bunch of years ago, first chapter at NCWF. Now across the state, we've got nearly 25, almost 30 chapters. So if you're reaching out to us and watching this Zoom from other parts of the state, seek out your local chapter. Certainly have events as well as presentations and volunteer opportunities. Certifying your yard is certainly an easy thing to do. Most of the folks that I imagine that are watching this presentation almost qualify already. There's the simple food, water, shelter, place to raise young that you would need to have. And really the last thing is to be real gentle when it comes to anything with the side on the end of it, fungicide, herbicide, insecticide, using those as a last resort. Finding much better ways to go ahead and handling what you would consider a pest problem. I heard somebody say that when they had a slug problem in their garden, the response was, well, you really don't have a slug problem. You've got a not enough duck problem because or not enough snakes or not enough frog problem. They take care of your slugs for you instead of reaching out and poisoning stuff. We talked about volunteers. We are a volunteer organization, and so we definitely look for folks as helping us in all sorts of different spots, whether you can help us a little or you can help us a lot. Joining our leadership team, it is a lot of fun to help coordinate our events, as well as our Earth Day event and our Kids in Nature Day event. So let us know, reach out to us, let us know how you might want to help, or just help us out gardening, or bringing cookies when we're starting to meet in person again, for hopefully things look good here in a few more months. We'll start doing these Zoom meetings rather in person, or maybe both Zoom as well as in person. Helping us decide on how to do all that. We could use your help. So please reach out to us. Let us know how you could assist. Last month, we had a wonderful presentation by Carol Bowie Jackson. Many of you already know her. She is one of the founding members of this organization all those years ago. Well, one of the things that we talked about is leaving your leaves. So you see plenty of your neighbors with a lot of leaf blowers this time of year and plenty of bagged leaves out and about, right? So they shouldn't be chucked the way they're chucked. All of these wonderful little creatures are in those bags. So you've got a lot of wonderful creatures, a lot of bird food that is in that leaf layer. We don't call it leaf litter anymore because negative connotation. Instead, it's a leaf layer, and it's full of wonderful plants that'll take care of your aphids, and they'll take care of your other pest problems. But you're throwing away all your good army workers as well as your bird food. So do pile up your leaves. It'll be gone in just a few months, by summer, that 1 foot tall mound of leaves turns into like a 2-inch layer of leaves. As many of our presentations here in the last year and a half have been on Zoom, they've all been recorded, like this one tonight, and they are available at our website. If you did not get a chance to see Doug Tallamy present to us last year, every time he presents, it is fantastic. If you haven't gotten this book, definitely get this one, as well as his other 3 that are phenomenal. I cannot encourage you to see and read and listen to some of the things he talks about. Really mind-opening, amazing science behind, well, there's the picture, bird food. So those insects are the key. I really want to thank all of our sponsors. Williams Subaru has been a sponsor of our Earth Day celebration for 5 years now. Unfortunately, we hadn't been able to do our Earth Day for a couple, but we're certainly looking forward to being able to do that in April. That's another volunteer opportunity for you folks. Come and help us set it up, maybe man a booth for us. In any case, Birdhouse on the Greenway and Wildology have always helped out, and we really want to thank them as well. You know, tonight we are very fortunate to have Lenny Lampel. Lenny's going to go ahead and talk to us about all the fun stuff that he does with Park and Rec, and his bio is so extensive that I've got to bring it up and cheat and read it, because it is fantastic. So let me tell you a little bit about Lenny. We're in for a treat tonight. Lenny, as it says on the screen there, is a natural resource supervisor with Mecklenburg County Park and Rec, the Division of Nature Preserves and Natural Resources. He's a curator for the Dr. James Matthews Center for Biodiversity Studies, and is also responsible for the management of biological assessments and inventories, the monitoring of federal and state listed rare plant species, and the coordination of various fauna and flora studies and projects. He holds a master's in environmental studies with a concentration in conservation biology from Antioch University, New England, and a BA in biology from SUNY in Old Westbury. He lives in Concord with his wife, 3 children, and their big furry dog and a cat. We are very fortunate to have you here tonight, Lenny. You're one of my favorite speakers, and I'm looking forward to sharing this with everybody else. Folks, if you've got questions, we're going to do a Q&A with Lenny at the end. So put it in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll get to it. We look forward to it. So sit back and enjoy. Lenny, we're looking forward to it. So you can take it away.
All right, well, thank you, Daniel. I appreciate the intro. It's my pleasure to be here virtually with you all tonight. And I noticed on my screen, I do have a little bit of a blue hue. So I'm not feeling blue. I feel good. So please ignore that. But I don't know why I'm picking up a little blue. But again, very happy to be with you all. And thank you. I know, this is a crazy time of year for a lot of people. The holidays are upon us. And taking time out of your busy schedule to, sit in on this talk tonight, is something I really appreciate, because what I'm going to present to you over the next little bit is, a lot of the work that I'm involved in and the natural resources group that I work with is involved in. So I love to talk about this stuff. I love anytime anyone wants to hear about the stuff that we do. And, especially when it's related to biodiversity, I mean, there's so much going on and it's such a big issue. And I think it's important for people to understand a little bit about some of the efforts that are happening locally to better understand, document, and protect our biodiversity. So I'm going to jump into the presentation. I think at the end we'll have some question and answer time, but I got a whole bunch of material that I'm going to try and cover with you in under an hour or so. But there was just so much that I had to include. There was some things I left out that I do and that our natural resources group does, but there's so much that I had to include, and I probably won't go too deep into it, but at least at the surface level to at least, bring it to your attention and make you aware of some of the stuff we do. So I'll be flying through some slides tonight for sure. But let me see if I can get it up and get that to work. Okay. Does that look good to everybody?
Yep, that's perfect.
All right, good. All right, so the name of the presentation is Documenting Biodiversity, Project Studies and Monitoring Efforts in Mecklenburg County. So told you that there's a lot of stuff I'm going to cover, and I'm going to kind of go through that as soon as it lets me. Oh, there we go. Okay, so here's the outline. I want to talk a little bit about our nature preserve and our nature preserve system in Mecklenburg County, and as well as natural communities management, because that ties directly into our nature preserves. Biodiversity monitoring at some of our project sites. We have a process called initial biodiversity assessments that we do in the county, so I had to talk about that. Some of the information gaps that we have, especially bats and the insects, which are one of my favorite groups and most important groups, especially when it comes to biodiversity and biodiversity loss. So definitely going to focus in on some of that. But some of the bat surveys that we've done, moth inventories is something that we've gotten ourselves into over the last number of years. I'm going to try and move this screen if I could, because it's covering up some of my wording. Oh, there we go. There. Okay. Our Center for Biodiversity Studies. Some of the citizen and community science projects that we get involved in locally, and some of the rare species monitoring that we do in the county. So all of this, plays into biodiversity and learning about biodiversity and protecting biodiversity. So it's all stuff that I had to include, but it's a lot. It's all, I can take any one or two of these topics. Just the rare species monitoring alone, I've done, 45-minute presentations on. But again, I'm going to try and condense it all, just at least to give you an introduction to expose you to some of the work that's happening behind the scenes in Mecklenburg County. But before I go into any of that, we do have to just start with some of the basics, biodiversity, what it is and what it means. I guess one blanket definition can be that it's the variety of life on Earth. So this is a blanket term for all living things, and that's not just plants and wildlife, but it's also fungi, it's bacteria, protozoans, the little tiny microscopic things that you don't see, but all living matter plays together and is weaved together in a very important system. And that is our biodiversity. There's lots of different definitions. That was one that was just more like a textbook definition you can find online. I think my favorite definition comes from E.O. Wilson. And if you're not familiar with E.O. Wilson, he is an incredible scientist, entomologist, a Harvard professor, and he's known as the father of biodiversity. So his definition, biodiversity is the totality of all inherited variation in the life forms of Earth, of which we are one species. We study and save it to our great benefit. We ignore and degrade it to our great peril. And I think that really captures, not what biodiversity is, but really the importance of it. It's not a term that's been around that long. I think the first real use, they were using the term biological diversity in the early 1980s. And then there was a conference where they actually coined the term biodiversity. I think that was in 1985. And E.O. Wilson was at that conference, and he had a paper come out in 1988. I think that was the first published source of the word biodiversity. So, when you really think about it, it's not all that long ago that we've been started throwing this term around, but the meaning of the word, it's such an important, catch-all for, life and for, the importance of life on Earth. So, there's no bigger topic than this, even though the word itself hasn't been around that long. But there are a lot of importances of biodiversity. Again, I'm going to try and figure out how to move this. There we go. Okay. But in the environment, biodiversity is involved in keeping our natural environments, our ecosystems functioning. You need this diversity of life to keep it all happening. So, I just kind of list some of the things here, protecting water resources, soil formation, nutrient recycling, breaking down pollutants, contributing to climate stability, maintaining ecosystems, and recovery from natural disasters. For us, when you're talking about people and what biodiversity means to us, we're getting some very important things out of this diversity of life on Earth. Food, medicinal resources, wood products, future resources, they're looking at, there's all kinds of new technologies that are being worked on. I heard something about working with some kind of plant products or fibers to replace single-use plastic bags. And, there's all these new technologies that we're looking at that, our biodiversity is going to play a very important role in. Social benefits can't be discredited as well. So recreation and tourism, for some areas, protecting biodiversity is very important because it's a big part of their economy. And then the cultural values, the biodiversity of certain regions, those animals and plants have been around as people have evolved on the landscape. So there's deep connections to them. So all this stuff is super important. But then, knowing that is great, but then understanding how much is happening to biodiversity is where it kind of gets depressing. And again, I'm not going to spend much time on this, but just, there's so many threats to biodiversity. They've kind of lumped them into 5 categories. But if you just kind of, just a quick, run through these, but, land use, habitat loss and degradation of terrestrial, aquatic, and marine habitats, pollution, species overexploitation, climate change, which of course is a really big one, and invasive species and disease. And these aren't always separate from each other. A lot of these can be kind of, associated with each other as well. So, just a takeaway from throwing this at you is that biodiversity is super important, and then it's also in trouble. So, trying to lower this a little more. There's a sort of a consortium of government organizations and scientists. I can't remember how many governments are involved, but there were several. But the IUCN, and another sheet on here. Oops, take that back. Has collected data for decades on endangered species, and that's really what they're looking at. They are the global authority on the status of the natural world and the measures needed to safeguard it. And by looking at endangered species, what they found in just looking from 2007 to 2020, how we have had 100% increase in the at-risk or species that are at risk or in danger of becoming endangered. So, and that, you can look at those bar graphs and you'll see different colors representing different taxa, but just about every taxa has increased, just since 2007. And going on to this slide. So they're trying to assess all the species on Earth at their risk for extinction. So far, they're at about 28%, which I think is 138,300 species. And of that, they have found 37,400 that are at risk or threatened with extinction. And again, just, breaking down a graph into some groups, or not a graph, but some pictures that show, for each taxa, the percentages that are feature endangered species. So, mammals, 26%, birds, 14%, amphibians, which we know are a group that's in trouble, is at 41%, almost half. So it's, it's sad to see all this. It can kind of be depressing to know how important biodiversity is and to know how much trouble it's in right now. But there are efforts going on all over the place to try and protect biodiversity. And, we know that there's efforts globally and there's efforts locally in different areas. So, for us, in here in Mecklenburg County, it's about understanding and protecting the biodiversity in our local area, in our nature preserves, because that's what we have control over. And there are people out there doing it. So I guess the real reason I get excited about doing this presentation is because, we all have been hearing about this information that I mentioned before. And a lot of people, can feel a little disheartened about, biodiversity loss. And, we're just getting hit with this information more and more. But I think, the takeaway is that there are people behind the scenes that are trying to learn and protect and, improve biodiversity and the habitats for biodiversity, every day all around us. So, this, I'm just going to talk about what's happening in Mecklenburg County, but, there are, this is happening in all different counties, and, there are state biologists out there working, and of course at the federal level too. So take some encouragement. I would like to leave with some of a sort of a feel-good type message that, we're working locally and there's people everywhere working globally, and together it becomes part of the, the global efforts to protect biodiversity. So for us, our main focus is in our nature preserve system. So, we're also looking at some parks and greenways, and we certainly do work there too, and we monitor rare species there. But predominantly we're looking at our 27 nature preserves, which encompass over 8,000 acres of land in Mecklenburg County. And there's a map that shows you where they're all located. So the group I work for is Mecklenburg County Park and Recreation's Division of Nature Preserves and Natural Resources. And that group includes all our nature centers. We have 4 of them now. There's Lada Nature Preserve, or Nature Center, I'm sorry, Reedy Creek Nature Center, McDowell Nature Center, and Stevens Creek Nature Center. All 4 of those facilities have environmental educators and outdoor recreation specialists that get people out into nature and help them learn about all the great stuff that there is in the county, and a chance to enjoy out, these protected areas and get closer to, wildlife and the protected plants that are there too. And there's also maintenance and operations staff that really work hard keeping these nature preserves in the best condition that they could be. And then there's our natural resources section, and we're the group that's doing a lot of the land management, as well as a lot of the monitoring and efforts to try and learn and protect everything that's out there. So that's, of course, what I'm really going to focus on, is that last part. But really quickly, our mission is to protect the region's biodiversity and natural heritage for its inherent value and for the benefit of future generations by promoting open space preservation, conserving natural communities, and fostering awareness and stewardship through environmental education and outdoor recreation. So what I love about that mission is biodiversity is the 5th word in there. So you can tell it's important, it's right up there. But the thing I want to talk a little bit more about is this part down here in the 3rd line, conserving natural communities. Because for us, that's kind of the key for protecting biodiversity. So if you've never heard this term, natural communities, it's a term that's defined as a distinct and reoccurring assemblage of populations of plants, animals, bacteria, and fungi naturally associated with each other and their physical environment. So our North Carolina Natural Heritage Program is the one that has defined the natural community types that we have in Mecklenburg County. So these are, communities that if, if people had never been here, well, or Europeans maybe had not arrived, what assemblages of plants and animals that might be in some of our forested areas, or might be you can find along rivers. And there's also some historic community types I'll talk about that have pretty much disappeared. So we're trying to get our natural areas into these best possible conditions that they can be, and protecting that assemblage of plants and wildlife. So if you look at something like this, for most people, this could just look like a woodland. But if you're thinking about it at a natural community level, this might be depending on what tree and plant species you're seeing. This could be a dry mesic oak hickory forest, or it could be a mesic mixed hardwood forest. This floodplain forest, if you're using the real natural community classification name, would be a Piedmont alluvial forest. This is an upland depression swamp forest, this kind of wetland forest type. So all these kind of forest types, but all of them are a little different from each other, and all again are classified differently, and based on the assemblage of trees and plants and wildlife that you can find in there. So I mentioned some historic community types too. So something that if you've ever heard of a Piedmont prairie, so this is something that really no one understands exactly what it should look like. It's not a true natural community type. It's been influenced by people, but it's been influenced by people for thousands of years. So Native Americans had burned the landscape for multiple reasons, of course, probably for making hunting easier to access to game animals was probably a primary reason why it happened. But when Europeans first walked through this part of North Carolina, they made notes about it, and often they described it as an open woodland, or the term grand savanna had been thrown out there. We're really not sure whether it looked like, I don't think it looked like a Midwestern prairie, but there was definitely stretches of grasses and probably sporadic trees that gave it this kind of really open feeling. So over time, we've lost that. So, land use has greatly changed the landscape. So what wasn't developed or turned into, an agricultural area was left to, turn back into forest. So these kind of open areas have all but disappeared. So we do have a few of these Piedmont prairie restoration sites in our nature preserves. And this one's at McDowell Nature Preserve. And there's another one you can see at Latta Nature Preserve as well. A couple of smaller ones too in some of our preserves that are not open to the public. And, we're trying to preserve this historic community as well, because there are a lot of the sun-loving wildflowers and plants that had evolved in this landscape have all but disappeared. So a lot of our rarest plants come from this type of a community area. So managing natural communities protects and enhances biodiversity. So that's our big connection. If we can get our natural community types in the best quality and condition that they can be in, that's going to benefit the greatest amount of biodiversity. So that's the way we try and look at it. If we look at it from the natural community level, protect these areas, and we're doing the best that we can for a wider diversity of wildlife and plants, of course. So if you leave a forest, and we buy some properties, and they might be a few hundred acres in size. And, for a lot of people that think that's great, this land is protected. It'll always be there. It'll never change. But things happen to landscapes no matter, if you're actively doing anything on them or not. So we could protect land and just leave it alone. But there's outside influences getting in, especially in smaller patches of forested habitat that have become fragmented and, are close to development. Native invasive plant species can easily get in and start taking over. So you look at a picture of a forest like this, and this whole green growth here is autumn olive or Elaeagnus, and it's a bad invasive from Europe, and it's kind of gotten in and to our forested areas, and it can just take over. So we work hard. We have management staff that spends a lot of time just fighting invasive species in our nature preserves. And it's a job that'll never end. There'll always be more. But if you work hard at doing that, you can start to get sites that look something like this. So this is an oak savanna at Latta Nature Preserve. The invasives are gone. And when you remove them from the picture, then you start getting a diversity of other wildflowers and plants coming in the areas where, the autumn olive had been choking everything out. So, this looks so much better than this. Some people don't have that eye for it, and they just think land is land and forest is forest. But, we can walk through areas and we just like, we just want to close our eyes because it's so impacted by invasive species. But it takes a lot of work to get from that to something like you're seeing now. So invasive species control, like I mentioned, we have a lot of staff, and this is actually a volunteer helping remove a tallow tree from one of our properties, Chinese tallow tree. This is one of our staff cutting down autumn olive at one of our rare plant sites. And, the hours of labor that are needed to do all this work is incredible. And, we have to just prioritize and work where we can and, make sure we're getting to some of the, most visible areas and some of the best quality areas. But again, it's a constant battle. Prescribed fire is probably our best tool for, helping with invasive species and just, helping at a natural community level as well. Like I mentioned, a lot of this part of North Carolina, in our area of the Piedmont, had been burned regularly by Native Americans. So a lot of our plants are really kind of adapted to periodical fire. And of course, that had been suppressed for a long period of time. And a lot of invasive species don't do as well with that because they're not coming from landscapes that had been burned often. So putting fire on the ground is a much quicker way, because we can burn, several hundred acres in a day, at certain sites under certain conditions. And then that's going to help remove invasive species, over time, and also help restore, just better quality conditions. It's amazing. when we walk through some of these sites after the burn, and you start seeing, different species of wildflowers coming up, and then start watching all the, the wildlife that come back. So it looks ugly right after the burn, but, for the health of that natural community, it's incredible to watch it just kind of come back after that. And it's fun. Yeah, some of our staff seem to really enjoy this. I don't know why, but it's an interesting process for sure. But one of the other things that our natural resources group has been involved in is doing some timber management. Working with the forested canopy and doing some logging. So this is interesting because this is something that we're also trying to help with public perception as well. So we'll put up some interpretive panels like this and try and give people the information to understand why this is actually a good process. On a lot of our nature preserves, we've inherited these loblolly pine stands. Loblolly pine itself as a tree is probably just barely at the edge of its range here, way more common a little to the south of us, but it never grew here as a pure stand. So these were all planted in here, and these are really low in biodiversity. It just becomes there's a few kind of weedy trees like sweet gum, stuff that'll get in there. But other than that, you're just seeing really low diversity. There's nothing on the forest floor. It just kind of be a dense loblolly pine stand. There are some pine-loving birds, of course, that you'll find in there, but we're going to talk more about those in a second. But logging in an urban region, there is that perception that removing trees is a bad thing. And of course, even in this day and age where there's a lot of information about climate change and how important trees are, for holding on to carbon. People hear about trees coming out of nature preserves, they think it's a terrible thing. But again, remember, we're working at the natural community level, and we're thinking about protecting biodiversity. So some areas we've been able to remove all the loblolly pines. Certain areas we're not able to do that. There's this one area in Cowan's Ford Wildlife Refuge in Huntersville that's kind of right above the Catawba River. It's kind of a steep area, and you didn't want to remove everything because that might cause some erosion issues. So they just kind of thinned out the loblolly pine trees. They did a third row thin and took out 33% of the trees. And it looks something like this after the logging operation. But over time, once you've done that, you start seeing this diversity of plants and wildflowers start coming back. So the benefits to our biodiversity can go unnoticed. You just might not see that, and you just see trees coming out in logging trucks, and people panic and think it's, something really bad is happening. But over time, it develops into something really good. So here's where some of the biodiversity monitoring stuff comes in. And what it says, they have data to the rescue. So we spent a few years out at this stand trying to collect biodiversity data, trying to look at, okay, in our heads, you take out some of these pine trees, you get more diversity of trees and plants. We're gonna see a kind of broad increase in biodiversity in general. But we wanted to have some information to back that up. So we set up this project. That green line kind of outlines the stand, and I won't go too much into the data to bore you or anything. But we did have, we set up a small mammal trapping transect. We had point count locations for birds. We had an invertebrate survey loop where we were collecting information on butterflies and dragonflies. We set up vegetation plots, and we had a moth trap location. So here is us setting up some of the small mammal traps. We caught a few different species, and we would weigh them and take some measurements, and then of course release them. The Sherman traps that we used, the small little metal box, does not harm them. There's food inside. They come in, the door closes behind them, and then we just take them out. And like I said, take some measurements on them, and then let them go. So the two most common species we would find in here would be this hispid cotton rat, which you see on the left, and a white-footed mouse that you see on the right. This was a baby opossum. I don't know how it barely even fit into the Sherman trap. I don't know how it got itself in there, but as soon as we picked it up and we felt the weight, we knew that we had caught something interesting. This was meant for small mammals, not possum-sized mammals. So after this happened, we were like, this is a once in a lifetime thing. You'll never see anything like this again. And the next week we went out and we had a baby opossum in one of the Sherman traps. So I guess it's a twice in a lifetime thing. But just to show you, so this went on for 4 years. 2015 was the data we collected before the logging happened. And then we collected data in 2016, 2017, and 2018. And you can just see the increase. So the blue bars represent small mammal abundance, and then the orange is the small mammal diversity or species richness. So again, not much diversity, but just the numbers, and again, we wouldn't expect, we don't have that many small mammals in this type of habitat anyway, so we weren't expecting that, but it's amazing to see how much just the numbers increased. In between 2017 and 2018, there was a prescribed burn on that pine stand. So we were going to stop after 2017, but we thought it might be interesting to do one more year post burn and see what kind of data we would collect. So the numbers did go down, but I would imagine if we kept the project going, it, they'd probably start going up again. And they probably went down because, the grasses were initially burnt off and the vegetation, wasn't as dense anymore. So I bet over time that picked up. But still, compared to 2015, it definitely a significant difference. And this is Katie holding a little white-footed mouse. So point counts for birds, we had 4 spots where we set up these point counts. We would listen for birds within a 75-meter radius. And again, just looking at 2015 pre-logging on the left compared to 2016, 2017, 2018, both increases in abundance and diversity. But what was good is we didn't lose the pine specialists. Those birds like the pine warbler was still there in the same concentrations. That was one thing we were thinking if we were going to lose some of the birds that really preferred pine trees. But just because the pines within her and other woody species were starting to grow in, and herbaceous species as well, the pine specialists were all still there. But we picked up birds that we weren't seeing before, like this yellow-billed cuckoo. So this is what it looks like afterwards. So when it's a dense loblolite pine stand, you're not going to see this. You're not going to see this diversity of forbs and wildflowers and cover for wildlife as well. So vegetation, we had 4 vegetation plots, and if you look at the different years, 2015 again was the pre-logging. That's a blue bar, and then orange is 2016, gray 2017, and yellow 2018. So everything increased for sure, except for non-native species, which was actually really interesting. That was the only thing that went down from 2015 to 2018. So we weren't sure about that. We just thought sometimes when you open things up, you are going to get a lot of invasive plants in. But maybe because Cowan's Ford is a large property and it's kind of protected by the Catawba River and there's not much development around it, we just didn't get that influx of invasives. But total number of species, you can see the increase up there. And just plants like this common blue curls that were not in the stand before, this beautiful little wildflower. And then we had our invertebrate survey loop. So again, recording dragonflies like this common green darner, or butterflies like this clouded skipper. And here's some of the changes in abundance and richness over time. And that is a dramatic difference from 2015. So it was that we hardly found any butterflies and dragonflies in there until the logging happened. But the first year was such a big response, I think, because it was really opened up and plants first started coming back, and it slowly started, declining from there. But, I don't think as it matures, we'll ever get back to what it was in 2015, which is good. So, that was 4 years there. And again, that's just, information that we can provide the public to show them, sometimes when you're taking out trees, it's not a bad thing and you're improving biodiversity. We're getting this habitat in much better condition and supporting a lot more species than it was before. And, we've kind of moved on from there because there's lots of other areas where we could use project monitoring as well. So Reedy Creek Nature Preserve had a stream restoration project happen. And these projects have been happening all over, the Charlotte area for sure. Our streams have been, heavily degraded, and there's been so many impacts to them. And the stream in Reedy Creek was no exception to that. You know, it was very entrenched. It was not, the water was not getting out into the floodplain the way it should. It just wasn't functioning as a quality stream anymore. We had lost all the macroinvertebrates, you know, water would just rush through. There wasn't good habitat for much of anything inside, you know, in the stream itself. So we partnered with County Stormwater and had the stream project through a nature preserve. It was the first time they've ever really been able to do something like this where they could catch the headwaters of a stream too, which was great. And same kind of thing, you know, we were going to collect data. We set up more, it wasn't as defined as it was at Cowan's Ford. We did more walking transects along the stream and the trails that were surrounding the stream, and looking at birds, butterflies, dragonflies. And we started this a couple of years ago when they did the stream restoration project. And I think now we're on our 3rd year post-construction. And we'll keep going, as you know, because the stream corridor is going to mature and there's going to be trees coming back in, you know, after the work had happened, you know, when they had to clear stuff out. So it's getting more dense now, and we just want to see what happens as it matures. Stormwater folks, as well as some of the faculty at UNCC and their students, are looking at some of the macroinvertebrates and some of the abiotic factors too in the stream. So we were kind of picking up some of the areas that they needed help monitoring. So again, for us, it was birds, butterflies, dragonflies, you know, things we can identify down to the species level. So far, I don't have graphs for anything like this, but we've definitely noticed increases in these groups since the stream restoration project has happened. And we have camera trap stations set up as well, and we catch lots of deer, of course, and you know, sometimes we'll get some coyotes, like in this picture, or skunks moving around, or beavers. And we're doing some bat monitoring as well. And I'll talk more about the bat monitoring efforts in a minute, but this is happening at the stream restoration site at Reedy Creek. So again, another similar project like this is at Ribbon Walk Nature Preserve. There's a pond that's failing, the dam is failing, and we talked to our stormwater services group about maybe not trying to keep this as a pond. Ponds aren't really natural habitats for our area. You know, the Piedmont, especially by our area, was all streams and creeks, but areas that were impounded up and turned into ponds, you know, become interesting habitat, but it's not a true habitat type that we would have normally found in our area. But what if instead of having a pond there, we brought this into more of a functioning wetland, which would be closer to what, you know, naturally you would see, especially, you know, with the work that beavers do along creeks and streams. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to convert a failing pond to a functioning wetland. And we were going to collect data on that as well. So we had a couple of vegetation plots. We had our point count spots. We have mammal camera trap link locations. We have a thing called a song meter that I'll show you a picture of. And again, trying to catch some of that biodiversity data for these different groups of organisms. So here's our song meter. It actually, we put it up on a post or a tree, and it'll just record frog species at night. And then we can go, we'll put it out for a week and collect it, and then have all that frog call data. So no one has to stand out in the preserve in the middle of the night, which is nice. And here it is put up on a tree. And here's our bat monitor at Ribbon Walk. And this is the failing pond that we're looking to convert to the wetland. And our mammal cap stations, we've certainly got some of these guys caught, some beavers. And this is setting up some vegetation plots. These areas change all the time depending on the work that a beaver are doing. You can see the beaver dam right here, and they'll move these dams, and certain times areas like this that are holding water, and this area that's gotten lower, sometimes this will be completely underwater and this will be lower. So it changes every time we go, every season we go there, it seems like. But on our point counts there, the very first point count that we did, we found this immature white ibis, which was not a common bird in the Piedmont at all, certainly a coastal plain species. So that was interesting to see. So we are only, we are still collecting pre-data at this point. So the project has not happened. So they're, right now it is still in the failing pond condition. So we've collected about 1.5 years of data. And we'll keep going after the project happens for several years and see again how things change and if we've noticed any differences in our biological communities. You know, there's a lot of these projects are interesting, but it's just great if we can really understand if they're benefiting these nature preserves and if they're improving our biodiversity. So at least we'll have that data behind us to say whether that is true or not. So this is one of the most, I think, interesting things that we do in Mecklenburg County, especially at the county level. When Mecklenburg County is interested in buying property, we'll have a chance to go out there and pretty much get first eyes on it. There's another group that'll go out there and look for any kind of like toxic dumping or anything like that. But around that same time, we'll have a chance to go out there and just walk these properties and look at the habitat quality and conditions. And think, because a lot of times when the county eyes a piece of property for purchase, they already kind of have an idea of what they want to do with that, whether it's going to be a park, maybe a small park, or maybe sometimes they're looking at larger parks, or maybe it's going to be a greenway parcel. A lot of times they might not be eyeing it up for nature preserves, although sometimes they are. But sometimes based on what we see and recommend, they actually become nature preserves. So it's really great to have that opportunity. The county does not want to, go purposely destroy really good habitat to put ball fields on. And a lot of times we can look at properties and there might be some really degraded areas that will say, yeah, this is great for a ball field, a picnic shelter or something like that. But this area is really nice and this should be left in a natural condition. And sometimes the whole thing is really nice and we can say this thing should really be a nature preserve. And sometimes it works out that way. So it's great. But in this process, we record all identifiable plants and wildlife that we observe. We describe and delineate natural community types. We note dominant species and highlight unique features or any site impacts. We record, the diameter of the canopy trees, and we'll make notes if there's some really significantly old or large trees. But the best part of all is that last line is where we create reports and provide those recommendations. So that's, what we hand off to the county and say, listen, this is something really nice and it should be a nature preserve. And one of our newer nature preserves is Possum Walk Nature Preserve, 62 acres off Beatty's Ford Road, south of Latta, closer to uptown Charlotte. Beautiful hardwood area along McIntyre Creek, a beautiful rocky creek, and some of these, just nice mature woodlands, natural community type in great condition at the site for sure. And this was one they wanted for a park, and I think part of it was going to be greenway. And we said this really needs to be a nature preserve, and we got it. So we, they understood the importance of protecting these areas. Especially in Mecklenburg County, development is happening so fast. And there's, some thought that most of the county could be built out by 2050. So these are our last chances to get these kinds of properties and protect them. And it's great to have the support of the county behind us for that. So this is another one that this happened during the pandemic. So this is one of our, in a tough year for a lot of people, we had a couple of feel-good stories, and this was one of them for us, was getting these 70 acres that we walked through in Huntersville protected. But this has become Farrelltown Nature Preserve. It's certainly our newest nature preserve. There's a small portion that had a home and a big area that was just a mowed front lawn that's just kind of in an old field habitat now. That's going to be good for a small park. So they had eyed this property all for parkland, but instead we have what's going to be now just maybe a really small park with, maybe a picnic shelter and that kind of thing, and then a protected 70-acre nature preserve behind it. So really nice habitat, nice trees, and we've gone in there a couple of times and just tried to record, different species that we're seeing and put some lists together. I think there was one day during migration, we had about 8 Swainson's thrush flying by us, which was interesting. So, but really nice preserve land. Just 2 weeks ago, we went out to a property on the Charlotte Mint Hill border. And this is, again, about 70 acres. The county had eyed this area up for a park. It fell kind of in a gap area where we didn't have many parks. But nice, really nice woodlands, low impacts from invasive species. And again, we made the recommendation that this should be a nature preserve, and it looks like it's going to happen. Nothing's official on this one yet, but so far we're keeping our fingers crossed, and we're hoping we can get this to be a nature preserve, or at least, most of it protected as a nature preserve if they want to put, again, a small park adjacent to it. But yeah, we never know. We get to walk these things and do these initial biodiversity assessments all the time. A lot of time we're disgusted by what we see, just a sea of invasive species and everything's been cut over and it's young forest and it's just so degraded. But sometimes we see these gems, and there's not many of them left. So it's great that we're getting some of them protected. So some of our information gaps, we have really good information on our biodiversity, for certain groups of organisms, certainly for a lot of the vertebrate groups. So reptiles, amphibians, birds, mammals, except for bats. We didn't have great information on bats until recently. For invertebrates, butterflies and dragonflies, we have some really good information on. But, bats has been one of those information gap areas for us. So a few years ago, we saw a presentation by Dr. Han Lee from UNC Greensboro. He runs the North Carolina subset of the North American Bat Monitoring Program. And he was excited that we were interested in doing something. He didn't have a lot of urban bat data. So he came to meet with us and helped us kind of get started on doing some bat monitoring, told us what equipment to purchase and how to set it up. But, we have these bat detectors that we had set up at Reedy Creek. This one is over a pond wetland area. We've got them high up on poles and on field forest edges. This one's along a floodplain, a creek over by Whitewater Center at the edge of floodplain forest. This one is on top of the parking garage for Discovery Place. So again, we're trying to kind of put these in as many different types of habitats, conditions, and places as possible to understand bat diversity and movement around the county. And these little yellow dots are all the bat locations where we had, put these monitors out. And this was done a few years ago and there was one or two of our staff that were really involved with this and spent a lot of time trying to get this data together and doing it in the format that we can share with Han, and it could be useful to the North American Bat Monitoring Program as well. And it's a really interesting process to kind of collect this data and then download it, and you get these spectrogram images, and based on the curves of the call signals that you're seeing and the frequency that you're calling at can help you differentiate which species you're seeing. So through this whole process, we've found 9 species identified by us kind of looking at these calls and also by running it through some auto identification programs like Kaleidoscope. But those are the bats: tricolored, big brown, evening, eastern red, hoary, Seminole, northern yellow, silver-haired, and Mexican or / Brazilian free-tailed bat. So some of these, I think, like tricolored bat is now a status species. So, there's so much going on with bats. And again, that's a whole presentation upon itself. But the declines in these species, white nose syndrome, of course, is one of the big issues that they're facing. And one of the species that got hit real hard with that is little brown bat. And we did pick up some little brown bat calls. We're not really certain if these are accurate or not, and we need to kind of keep collecting some more data. But that's a bat that historically we would find in this region, but its populations are down by like 95%. So it's really sad. But by continuing the bat monitoring that we're doing at some of these project sites, it'll be interesting to see if we do find some more potential calls for little brown bat. So based on what we'd find, and this kind of created some interest, and some of the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission biologists were excited to kind of come out and add Reedy Creek to a statewide bat mist netting survey that they were doing. So our staff joined with their staff, and we spent one night out there doing some mist netting. That night we caught all big brown bats. They're the ones that they say tend to be the most bitey when you're pulling them from the mist net. So lucky us, but we had a chance to be part of the process and catch the bats, take them out of the nets. We would collect data on them, put that little band that you see like there on the wing, look at wing conditions. And as you can tell, I was very excited to be part of this effort. So another information gap area, and again, a subject I could go on for hours about, is insects. We had good information on butterflies and dragonflies, but that was it. But when you talk about biodiversity, there's no way you can't bring insects into this picture as a main focus group. So I love these pie charts, and I use this in some insect talks that I do too, but this chart shows you all life on Earth. You know, the Earth's biodiversity is right here laid out in all the different taxa and classification systems that they belong to. And if you look at the right side of that, insects constitute 54% of life on the planet. And here's just another kind of visual of that same thing. So, you know, protecting plants and wildlife is so important. But if you're not specifically talking about insects in your biodiversity efforts, you're missing a major part of it. So, you know, there's got to be a focus on insects as well. We know they're declining. We know how important they are for everything. You know, the role as pollinators has gotten so much attention. So, you know, we definitely need to learn a lot more about our insect diversity. Here's just another chart that shows insects in global decline, you know, for most groups, including some that are really, you know, in serious decline. And you can kind of compare that top part with the insects with the vertebrates below. So we know, you know, a lot of life on Earth is declining in general, but it's happening a lot faster for insects. And then, you know, in some studies that they've seen, you know, for even like birds that feed on insects, you know, they're declining rapidly as well. So for insects and for groups that are directly associated to them, it's been pretty bleak as of lately. The only good thing, I guess, that comes out of something like this is that if it gets bad enough, it gets some national attention. So, you know, there's been scientific papers coming out for a long time about insect loss and what's going on with insects. And, you know, and it's had, you know, the scientific community concerned. But this hit in December 2018. This was the cover of the New York Times Magazine. And I think this was the perfect way for the public to really get that, wow, this is really serious. And it was titled "The Insect Apocalypse is Here." And, you know, it's one of those kind of titles that, you know, might sound sensationalized because that's such a big thing that the media loves to do. But in this case, it's probably justified, but it got attention. It really did. And it had a lot of people thinking about what's going on with insects. Another quote from the great E.O. Wilson: "If we were to wipe out insects alone on this planet, the rest of life and humanity with it would mostly disappear from the land within a few months." So, I mean, that tells you, you know, just how important these organisms are and how much we need them. So where do you start? I mean, you know, we're doing a lot of things, and I hope you can kind of get the sense through this presentation of, you know, all the effort that our group is in, all different efforts our group is involved in when it comes to biodiversity and natural communities and protecting natural communities and protecting land. So how do you start focusing on insects? You know, that's a big thing to tackle. So for us, we started a few years ago on moths, and, you know, that figured that would be the first focus area. This gentleman on the right, many of you know, is Mr. Taylor Pehoff. He was the one who got the whole thing started, and he got a list of a couple hundred species going for us before he moved on to our environmental health department. But they were just a great group to look at. They're important roles in pollination, just like butterflies, of course. Important food source for birds and wildlife, high diversity. They have connections to our native plants. You know, some of the caterpillars just feed on certain species as their host plants. They're attracted to light and easy to survey. I mean, that's great that you can turn on a light and they come to you. Increasing number of resources for identification, and that's one of the important things too. So we started with this Mecklenburg County Moth Nights, and this went on for a few years, where once a month we would go into our nature preserves at night and set up these sheets and black lights and just hang out for a few hours and document all the different things that we were seeing. And our list kept growing. You know, went from 200 to 300 to 400. And it's amazing when you do something like this. And we partner with our nature centers to host a moth night for the public a few times a year. And we've partnered with North Carolina Wildlife Federation chapters as well to do these public moth nights. It's, you know, it's great for us because, you know, again, we're documenting things that we're seeing and finding new species, but for the public to have the chance to kind of go out after dark and just, you know, people have their perceptions of what moths are and what they look like and stuff. But when you really see the different forms and structures and colors and markings on these things, you're blown away. So this is just a small, very small sampling of a few of them. But just the, you know, different patterns and shapes and sizes, it's incredible. So, I mean, just beautiful creatures. So it's a great way to get people hooked on nature too, and just, get some, just again, better connected with their natural world around them when you have a chance to see some of these incredible creatures that are hidden during the daylight hours. So what we've done recently too, on the left, you can see the standard sheet and black light, and on the right is one of our mobile moth traps. So we've been leaning on more moth trapping as of lately, where we can kind of get them deeper out into nature preserves. And we've built a few projects around them. On the left is Stephanie Hedrick, and for her thesis project, she was actually, I'm not sure why it does that. She's looking at, how moth diversity and richness or abundance and richness might change based on how much invasive species there are, or how close we are to more of an urban setting as opposed to a rural setting. So, just kind of comparing and contrasting. And on the right is Master Naturalist volunteer Becca Tate, who is with us tonight, helping out with this project. Once they're attracted to the light, they fall into this bucket. We have an ethyl acetate, which is the stuff used in like nail polish remover, and the fumes will kill them. And then we can take them out and, put them into some trays and bring them back to the Dr. James F. Matthews Center for Biodiversity Studies. So this is where, we kind of prep up the specimens and, store them, and then we can work with them. And like it says there, this is where the magic happens. So this is where we really start to learn about them. And I don't know why it jumps ahead like that, but here's Stephanie again, looking under a microscope at some small micro moths that she had collected. And in doing so, I popped in there and she's like, you have to look at these things. So even smaller than some of the micro moths were these little leaf hoppers, and they're beautiful. They belong to the scientific group, the Homopterans. Tiny, they look like little specks until you get them under the microscope, and you can see the diversity of markings and colors in these little organisms. So we don't know too much about these yet, but we're keeping them all. And when have more time and we're done with the moths, we can work with identifying them too. And we're certainly going to keep these for our permanent collection, which I'll talk more about in a second. But the identification work can be really difficult. And sometimes some of these moths are tiny, which makes it hard in itself. But some of them, and this one's actually pretty large, this grapevine looper, there's nothing to separate them by physically looking at them to tell if it's sometimes 1, 2, or 3 different species that all physically look similar. So this could be a greater grapevine looper or a lesser grapevine looper. There's nothing in the physical appearance of this moth that we can separate which of those 2 species it is. So that happens with, unfortunately, a pretty good number of moths. It's a small subset of the whole moth world, so which is good, but there are some that we have to kick it up to the next level on. And for that, you need genitalic dissection. So in not knowing how to do moth genitalia dissection, we called in the expert. And this gentleman standing is Mr. Bo Sullivan. He's probably one of the leading lepidopterists and certainly the best moth expert in North Carolina. And he gave us a workshop on how to dissect moth genitalia. So in this informational, I wanted to give you information about what's happening that you might not know about. And you probably had no idea that people were dissecting moth genitalia right under your nose here in Mecklenburg County. But it was fascinating. It was a fascinating class. And then, again, we're trying to gain, and we haven't spent that much time doing yet. We have a lot of specimens that we have aside that when we get some quiet time during the winter months, we hope to get to. But we are willing to go to this level to help us better understand our biodiversity, because this is what you have to do sometimes. But so far, through all this moth work, the number of moth species that we've documented in Mecklenburg County as of December, we are up to 911 different species. And I have to say, there's actually a bunch more than that. I mean, we have a whole bunch of pictures, and there's records we've gotten from people. Will Stewart alone has gotten some great records that we have to compile. Ken Neidel has lots of great records that we have to compile and add to our list. And again, we have it all put aside for some of our quieter time during the winter months. And that number is going to probably by the time we're done this winter, just from our backlog of photos, and especially with a lot of the data we have from Ken with stuff he's found, we're going to be well over 1,000 species. And we take these moths and then we'll put them into a permanent collection. Again, there's so much going on with understanding the diversity of these things, and what we think is one species now, sometimes getting separated to 2 species or even 3 species. And that could be happening just at certain geographical areas. So having specimens kept aside, we're able to work with them then. And if we have to do a genitalic dissection, we have the specimen to do that with. Or sometimes there's just, you could take off a leg and send it somewhere to have it genetically barcoded. And that can help sometimes separate. You might even find a new species doing something like that. So this collection lives, and again, the Dr. James F. Matthews Center for Biodiversity Studies, which is located in the back of the Reedy Creek Nature Center. So it's kind of closed to the public, but if anyone knocks at the door, we'll more than happy to give you a tour if we can. But our moth cabinet collection is growing and growing, and we have at least a couple thousand preserved moth specimens now, and we'd like to have a representative specimen for every species at least that we have in the county. And again, areas are being developed, we're losing species, so these are permanent records of something that once was that might not be here in the future. So it's important to kind of have these specimens. And along the lines of specimens, the Center for Biodiversity Studies is named for Dr. James F. Matthews, and this is Dr. James Matthews. So the biggest part of our facility is our herbarium collection. And Dr. Matthews was a botanist at UNCC, and he's spent at least 60 years in the field collecting plants, not just in Mecklenburg County, but all around the state. But certainly we have a great collection from the county as well, and surrounding counties and other states, and wide-ranging collection that we've inherited from his work that was done at UNCC. This collection all lived at the university. And I think it was 2005 when the biology department was moving to a new building, and they realized that they were not going to have room to house these collections. So at that point, the whole herbarium that Dr. Matthews had worked on for so many decades was in danger of, getting tossed into a dumpster potentially. And with it was some other smaller collections too by some other professors, zoological collections with fish and insects and that kind of thing. So it was organized then to kind of that the county would take all this. It was housed in a few different locations, but the hopes were that one day we'd have a facility that would just keep these biological collections. And again, these are records of life in the county that, some of these areas don't exist. We have specimens of Galax in the county in areas that are now underneath Lake Norman. You can't even find that plant in the county any longer. We would have never even known that it once was here, except if it wasn't for all this kind of collection work. And that was collected by Dr. Daggy at Davidson College, and that collection went to UNCC and became a bigger collection, and joined in with Dr. Matthews' collection. And now that is all housed in our facility, and we've absorbed a few other collections as well since then. And it's just getting bigger and bigger. We're just about to hit 50,000 preserved plants in our collection, coming up definitely by the end of this year. And here's Dr. Matthews working with some of our volunteers. So he is still active. He comes in a couple times a week and works on specimens and works on updating the taxonomy for name changes for some of the species plants that we've been mounting recently. One of the big projects that we have done with the herbarium over the last few years is to try and digitize the entire collection. And we've just about done that. We've just about recorded pictures. We have 2 imaging stations set up where we can get pictures of these, of the plants, of the herbarium specimens. And then these are uploaded to something known as the CERNAC portal. CERNAC is the Southeast Regional Network of Expertise and Collections. And that has all the herbaria within the Southeast, including ours on there. So researchers can go on and just look, like if you're working with a species, you can go on there and then look at all the records for where that species has been collected, and there's pictures you can zoom in, and it's been helping people with their research. So again, our smaller collection, and not that it's small, but there's some collections, of course, that are hundreds of thousands of species, for some of the larger ones. in the Southeast. But it's a collective pool of information now. It's all getting used by scientists and researchers. And we found out that there was a state record milkweed that was in our collection. We didn't know it was a state record. There was a few other records of it, but in other collections, but they were misidentified. So ours has become the one state record we have for this species. So you never know. These collections are really important for helping people understand more about, what's around them. And it's just great that it can be used at a greater level than just the Mecklenburg County level as well. So here's Mary and Caroline imaging some specimens. This was recently. You can tell by the masks. And what's great too is we become a resource for other folks that are trying to learn more about stuff. This is a professor from Wingate University. She brought a student over. They're trying to make a collection of all the plants that they found around their campus, and some of the grasses and sedges and stuff that they were having trouble with, they brought by so that we can help them identify. So we spent a day just kind of sitting down going through their stuff. So again, our comparing, their plants to stuff in our collection to help them make correct identifications. So, we're acting as a resource for other, researchers, locally. And of course the images take that even beyond locally. And there they are. It was a fun day. My brain was hurting by the time I was done, but it was great. So there is this online thing that we have called MechFlora. This was kind of built out from our herbarium collection and from the information that we've collected about plants within our nature preserves. So the public can go to this site, and the website is listed right there, or you can just Google MechFlora. And you can go to a property, like you can go into Reedy Creek and it'll bring up all the plants that have been identified there. Or you can just look at a plant and see what properties it's been identified, or you can just, kind of see lists of the different species that are here. So that's something that's accessible to the public. We hope one day to have a MechFauna, which would be the wildlife equivalent to this as well. And, where again, you can look up and you can see which, salamanders or frogs or birds or anything that's been, documented out properties before, and maybe even make those lists printable. So again, help people to have that better information about what's out in our nature preserves, because it's all important. So this is a new thing that we've gotten ourselves into, is this worm study. I actually have not been too involved in this project, but what's been happening is, we have some of our areas that we have, or I guess they're our burn units, where we kind of use prescribed fire to, help control invasive species, protect the quality of our natural communities. And then there's some unknowns there, like, how's that affecting the soil? How's that affecting the things that we're not seeing underneath the soil? So I don't think anyone's ever really kind of looked at that, but we set up a worm study to and there was collecting some worms from areas that had not been burned, and then collecting a whole bunch of worms from our burn units that are regularly burned. So are we seeing a greater, since, the soil might be more fertile, are we seeing an increase in richness or abundance? Are we seeing different species? Are we finding native species? Is it all invasive? So again, this is a brand new project, and it's just one more way we're trying to learn more. There's so much that we see above the ground level, but now we're kind of taking it below ground as well. So besides our efforts, in our projects, we'll also join in and help at some local citizen community science projects that happen, all throughout the, that are regular yearly occurrences. And the two big ones that I get involved in every year are the Southern Lake Norman NABA butterfly count. And this is one that Taylor coordinates. And we spend the day every year at the same properties, recording butterfly data. And what's great about this, it's these kind of counts that go on after a while, they go on for decades, is that you can really see how things are changing. Are we, it's just those snapshot. We do it at the same time every year, and you can see which species are declining. Are there any species that are increasing? Are we seeing species we hadn't seen before? And it's just a great way to get that information that wouldn't be possible otherwise. So these kind of one-day commitments each year to just go out to the same location and collect the data all day long. And those NAB accounts were kind of, at least for us, that Southern Lake Norman one was modeled after the Southern Lake Norman Christmas bird count and occurs in the same areas. But again, we'll participate in that. And there's plenty of the Charlotte Christmas count is around. And, there's a spring count that happens as well. There's a Gaston County count. And there's so much important data comes out of this, these one-day snapshots to go out, look at birds all day, count everything that you see. And then again, you have this, this data pool that you can look at trends and see how species are doing over time. Okay, Climate Watch, Ken Neidel coordinates this one for Mecklenburg Audubon. And this is a really neat project that focuses on species that are susceptible to climate change in a certain region. So for us, we're collecting data on brown-headed nuthatches and white-breasted nuthatches, but we're collecting data on other species as well. So we'll go out and do a bunch of point counts. And for us, we're helping out at McDowell Nature Preserve, Wingate Nature Preserve, and Wingate Park. And we have about, I think, between those 3 properties, a dozen count points set up. And twice a year, we'll go out, and once in summer, once in winter, and collect this data, with, again, the focus being on those nuthatch species. And over time to see if those species are starting to fall out of the landscape and what kind of population changes that were happening. So this is really just a focus on, how things are changing based on climate change. And these are good target species to look at. So quickly, I know I've been going for a long time. Rare flora monitoring. Again, I could spend the whole presentation just on this, but keeping up with some of the rarest species that we have in the county and how their populations are doing. Here's a Stephanie Hedrick halfway up a slope above 4 Mile Creek, counting a population of Piedmont aster. Our poster child endangered species for Mecklenburg County is Schweinitz's sunflower, Helianthus schweinitzii. It is a federal and state listed endangered species. And, it only occurs in about 14 counties in North and South Carolina, but some of the largest populations tend to be in Charlotte or right around us for sure. And we have these plants showing up at a number of properties. So this is one, like I mentioned before with Piedmont prairies, this type of habitat, this open woodland savanna is perfect for it. It's getting a lot of sunlight. But over time, with land use changes, that has all but disappeared. So they're hanging on some kind of roadside edges and some power lines, and really that's about it. So unless we're making Piedmont prairie restoration sites to house populations of these plants, they wouldn't have that habitat is just going away constantly. And power line management too seems to be more herbicide use, less mowing, so that's impacting them as well. But here we are at Latta Prairie, counting population of Schweinitz's sunflowers. This is roadside at McCoy Prairie. And then, we'll put up signs to protect some of these important areas as well. I like this sign because, it mentions pollinators and, people certainly, like I mentioned before, getting that connection to pollinators. But when you can tie in a monarch with a Schweinitz's sunflower, and then you see something like this, you feel good. So it's just great having these places protected for these rare plants. And then of course it, benefits our local pollinators as well. So protecting, enhancing, understanding, and promoting biodiversity in Mecklenburg County, that's what we do. That's what we're trying to do. That was a lot. So I know, I'll see how much time we all have for questions and stuff, but that was a lot that I threw at you. And if you're still here and still tuned in after all that, thank you. And let me see if I can get this off the screen now.
No, that's great. You can leave that on. Lenny, that was fantastic. Matter of fact, if you put that with the butterfly on the sunflower, that is the payoff. Thank you so much. I know we're going to get plenty of comments of thank you, thank you, thank you. That was wonderful, great. We've got plenty of questions that came in. Certainly, we hope that you can stick around for a little while and answer some of these questions.
My pleasure.
Wonderful. So, there were questions going all the way back to when you started talking about E.O. Wilson and that he's got a paper that came out in the mid-'80s, The Little Things That Run the World. I know that Tallamy, Dr. Doug Tallamy, has a early presentation where he talks about precisely that. That's the topic of it. There's no question. we had a wonderful experience at our Earth Day celebration a couple of years ago now, but we're certainly looking forward to the one in April coming up, but where we did a tree hugging station. And so the kids were really excited, just taking their picture hugging a big giant oak tree. But the real beauty of it was if you just took a moment and stopped and enjoyed and take a look at the bark and see what's going on in there, all of a sudden the bark comes to life. There's plenty of stuff hiding camouflaged in that bark. And there are plenty of little things
Right.
that for them to enjoy and explore and really discover. So
Yeah, that's a great activity.
I love that you were doing this. There are of course the moth nights are so much fun that we had a comment as well. Thank you. You actually did a moth night for us about 3-4 years ago at this point. Had a lot of fun at that. So hopefully we'll be able to encourage you to come next season for us to do that.
You don't have to plan on too hard for that.
Yeah. There was a question about has the county done or can they do BioBlitz census days where citizens can learn and assist?
Yeah, we've had a couple of them happen, and that will usually happen through the nature centers. But they'll set up a public BioBlitz where people can come and again, yeah, do exactly that, go out all day. And it's a great way, and especially in the term of biodiversity, to really get people to understand, how many different things are around them, especially when you start getting into like the insect part of it and stuff. I love being a part of BioBlitzes. I've joined in several. I know the state runs numerous ones every year, but I'm not sure. I'll have to talk to our education staff to see what they have planned for this year, but they've definitely have hosted them in the past. And I'm sure there will be more coming up.
Great. Well, if you would let us know, or we'll certainly post it and let folks know about it as well.
Yeah.
I know there was a Christmas bird count that's coming up. Christine had mentioned that newbies and experts are all welcome.
Yeah.
Mecklenburg Audubon has info on how to sign up for the 4 nearby counts, including Charlotte. So mechbirds.org is a site to go check that out if you want to participate. Certainly, we had a comment that Mecklenburg County is lucky to have you. So thank you for that. Absolutely, I feel and felt the same way. We certainly appreciate that. There were a couple of other questions that came through. You have these studies that you guys are doing, for instance, like the pre and post burn, pre and post experiences as far as helping control, whether it be like the pines and that type of thing.
Right.
One of the questions that came up, and I've got to read it over here. So other than budget restraints, what limits the studies that you guys are doing?
Staff restraints. It's just the amount of time. And, so when you commit to doing these things, you want to have that chance to collect that data before whatever disturbance, we create on the property, and then several years after to see how biodiversity responds to that. But it takes time to do all that, especially if there's things like the small mammal trappings. That means you have to go out there and set the traps one day. You have to go back out there the next morning and check the traps. So it's a 2-day investment. And if you're doing them weekly, or, it can be a lot. So when you have a couple different projects and then getting those requests from the county to go out and do those biodiversity assessments, those come in frequently. And sometimes it'll be a slow period, and sometimes, we'll get a bunch of them that we have to go out and do. And then, there's the rare species monitoring. So you have to make sure you're out there at the right times to get those plants. So we're kind of limited just by the number of staff we have. And there's always like these good ideas like, oh, this would be a great thing to get into. It's like, no, we can't until we're done with this, especially other insect groups and that kind of thing. There's so much that would be really interesting and important to learn, but we still have a handful, which is moths. So once we feel like we got a good grip on that and we're able to produce something, and put that on a website or have something where we can give to people and say, look, this is a little book or booklet or something, or a pamphlet on our, moth highlighting some of our main moth species, and, put it into something that benefits the public as well, and have our real great set of data behind us. At that point, we might feel comfortable moving to a different taxa. But again, we're just limited by the number of staff and the amount of time we have, because we want to make sure what we are doing, we're doing really well, before we jump into something else that, we don't have time for. And there's so
Right.
much
So
that needs jumping into.
that's exactly right. I mean, I can only imagine, I mean, just time, people, and dollars
Yeah,
to be
yeah,
able to do it all.
yeah.
Well, so like, for instance, the project that you had for the 15, 16, 17, 18,
Right.
here we are almost in 22. Are those projects slated to then, you were doing them annually for 5 years. Do you then toss something in where you do something at the 8-year mark and the 12-year mark or 15-year mark or something like that?
Yeah, we sort of loosely talked about that. We don't have anything formalized yet because we have those 2 other projects happening now. But that would be a great thing to do, is to go out and do that kind of follow-up revisit, give it a number of years, let things mature and come back and then see what it's looking like. So that's definitely something we talked about, and it's something we might do at the refuge. And just for myself, I'd love to get back out there and see how things have changed now that it's been a few years. But again, we'll just have to make sure it's something we can make happen and fit in. I'm not involved in much of the invasive species work that happens, but I know that can keep our staff going, all year long. I mean, there's no end to it. And same thing with, working with prescribed fire and getting burn units ready, and some of the management stuff. It's just so much. It's amazing to see how much time and effort goes into this work.
Right. Yeah, the invasive species, that is, and unfortunately, plenty of them are still available at our big box store nurseries.
Yeah.
So if anyone wants to have that disaster going on their property, just head on over to the nurseries that don't really care about native plants or invasive plants.
Yeah.
Hey, so there was another question about when you're doing those studies on the new properties, and that's wonderful that Mecklenburg County is sending out, like, let us know not just if this is polluted land that we really don't want to touch because of the liability of it, but is this a treasure? And that seems to be what you guys are discovering or exploring to see. Is this, something really special? So what makes it the difference between recommending that it be a nature preserve rather than it be a park or some other type of classification or some other land purchase?
Right. Yeah. And we're sensitive to the process, because we don't want to go out and just be like every property say, oh, this should be nature preserve, don't put anything on it. Like, we really want to do it based on, the quality and conditions of what we're seeing. So, if we go out and it's land that's been degraded, it's been cut over, it might, just be really young at this point with some sweet gum trees and tulip trees and some of those more weedy hardwoods that first start growing in, lots of invasive species. We need, I know where my heart lies, but I know we need, park amenities for people too. We need places for them to go and recreate, and those are super important. And so some of them just lend themselves well to something like that, where it's not good quality area, and it's like, okay, and it's filled with invasive species. Okay, this would be fine for, a park with ball fields and that kind of thing. But other places, you get out there and, there's, the forest, it looks like it's 80 years old and there's not many invasive species. We're seeing a great diversity of, like different natural community types. There might be slopes that have different trees and plants growing on them than some of the higher, flatter areas, or you get down by the creeks and there's a whole different suite of species. And, it's got a high diversity and low impacts. And, we can just make notes of all that, and has some, maybe potentially some rare species on it too. And present that, and write it all up in a report. And of course that all takes time, and produce maps and lists and everything, and hand it off and say, this is why it should be a nature preserve. And I think it's really unique at the county level to have a process like that, or even to have a built-in natural resources group like ours, but especially to have a process like that they take seriously, and because they value the resources and they want our input. So yeah, and we're happy to provide it.
That's fantastic. It's very, very nice to hear that that's how it's getting put together. Are there other counties that you guys network with that you share kind of best practices? Hey, this is what we're doing over here. What are you guys doing in the surrounding counties as well? As, North Carolina's got 100 counties throughout, so there's a lot of opportunity to do all these things.
Right, and we've met with folks from a few surrounding counties for their park department, and they were interested in kind of modeling something after what we do. And I know a few times, they've had their own staff changes, and some of the people that were looking to spearhead that have moved on elsewhere. And I don't think it's gotten that much traction yet, but I know there's a buzz from a few people in some surrounding park departments to kind of start a natural resources group and, have something similar in place to what we have, maybe on a smaller scale at first. But that's encouraging, and we're always happy to sit down with those folks and talk about, what we do and how it got started and where we're at and the challenges and all of that.
Well, that's fantastic. Mecklenburg County has got a bunch of little towns in it, including Matthews. But Matthews, I know, has their own park and rec department.
Yeah.
And their own park and rec director, who we work hand in hand with when we're doing stuff at our parks, like installing chimney swift tower over at Purser Halsey Park here in Matthews here recently, and other things that we've done. So do you guys coordinate with everybody in Mecklenburg County, even the towns that aren't necessarily part of like the city of Charlotte? Is that part of what you guys do?
Right. And I'm sure we do. And I'm sure, for different reasons, our park department's so big, we're a few hundred full-time staff, and I'm sure they coordinate with local park departments on all different things. For us in the work that we do, especially out of the Center for Biodiversity Studies, and, just using like our Moth nights for one thing, we've partnered with Town of Matthews Park. We've done Moth nights at Squirrel Lake Park. We've partnered with Town of Cornelius. We partnered with Davidson Land Conservancy. Worlds of Wonder is also out of Davidson, and we've done some Moth nights for them. So yeah, we've done a lot of those kind of partnering things where we can kind of bring whatever expertise we've kind of built up over the years, and to bring that to them in some kind of, usually it's more of an educational setting where, they can invite people in to do cool stuff like that, like look at moths at night. But yeah,
well, that's wonderful.
We're always happy to partner, and of course with North Carolina Wildlife Federation chapters too.
Well, that too, sure, and we very much appreciate that, no doubt, Lenny. There was a question about the plants that are in the log pine forest area that
Yeah.
once that area had been opened up and and it truly literally blossomed with plants that weren't there. Were those naturally occurring, or was that something that was spreaded by seed, or how'd that happen?
Yeah, no seed was spread. So it was all things that must have been dormant in the seed bank somehow. And just once they had the opportunity, they came up. But, seeing stuff like the blue curls, and there was a lot of it, was just so incredible. I just didn't expect it to happen that fast. But, within 1 year of those trees being removed and sunlight hitting the ground, you were just seeing these great plants come in. It was really cool. And there
That's
are,
really encouraging.
there are some open areas in Cowan's Ford that aren't too far away. So, there is the potential for seeds to kind of make their way over on their own. But this stand was pretty isolated and was surrounded on two sides by the river. So I think a lot of that was just there waiting for an opportunity, and we gave it to them.
That's really fantastic when you think about, again, talking about a seed bank. Most everybody else thinks it's all these invasive plants that are stuck in your seed bank for years and years and years until you get those out, truly eradicated. So that's fantastic. That's really encouraging to hear. I know you talked about the failing the dam over at what is that?
Ribbon Walk Nature Preserve.
Ribbon Walk, that's right. There are beavers over there, and so the question is how the beavers are managed since they can change the landscape over there, and how, if that, of course, changes. So is part of the program there to get the beavers out of Ribbon Walk?
No, what I like about it is they're incorporating beavers into it, and they're building. I mean, I don't understand the whole process. I'm not an engineer or involved in that end of it. I'm more on the biological data collection part for this. But I know they're building these, I forget what they're called, beaver analog devices or something that, that are designed to have beavers work in cooperation with the way they're setting it up, so that they become, they're designing this with the thought that beaver is going to be a part of this landscape, a major part of the landscape.
That's really encouraging.
It's not the kind of thing that they'll set it up and the beavers will come in and disrupt it, and then the beavers will have to be removed. They're planning for beavers to be
ingrained
in this process.
That's really fantastic to know that it's working with nature instead of trying to take over it and and do all the things, because they are landscape changers, those beavers. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
There was another question from as far as like the plants that are there. Do you guys collect seeds from some of these endangered plants and try to propagate?
We have done that in the past. It's been probably about 15 years since that's happened. At one point, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, kind of who oversees some of the work with some of the endangered plants like Schweinis's sunflower and Georgia aster, had requested that we kind of hold off on that and stop augmenting our populations and just leaving them the way they were and just trying to see how they do on their own, as opposed to just constantly adding seed and seeing more and more. They were just curious to see if these plants, at least the numbers we had in the ground at that point, were going to thrive and just take off and spread out through the prairies on their own. I think that's kind of changed a little bit now. I've heard they've kind of lightened up on that, and it's a little easier to get permission to do that. We haven't started doing that yet, though, and again, probably more because of staff time and that sort of thing. But that option, I think, is more available it was than in recent years.
I can appreciate that. Talking about volunteer opportunities, there were several questions about that. What are the opportunities for volunteers? Is there any opportunity available for the biodiversity office, and certainly the invasive plant removal? You talked about that being truly keeping that staff full-time job, never ending. Unfortunately, it certainly doesn't look like there's a light at the end of the tunnel, particularly like on some of those things like autumn olive and that type of thing. So are there opportunities for volunteers to help out there? Or
there certainly is from time to time. Our lab is at capacity right now with staff and volunteers, so we're good. I mean, that changes all the time, but we have a good flow going and all the seats are taken, which is great. It's a good problem to have. But certainly with invasive species removal and doing some of those kinds of things, I know we've sometimes actively look for volunteers for certain projects, and other times, we just have some volunteers that are willing to just kind of go out to certain areas and do some of that work themselves, without, of course, not using chemicals and stuff, but at least some of the hands-on mechanical pulling of stuff out and that kind of thing. But there are opportunities available. I think what the best thing to do is go onto the Mecklenburg Park and Recreation website, and anyone who becomes a volunteer has to kind of filter through that first. And you have to do, there's a whole process, but there should be a link on there for becoming a volunteer. You go through a background check and that kind of thing and some paperwork process. And then on there, you can say which group you're interested in working with. And then once you pass that whole thing, then the volunteer coordinator for the department would pass that person along to us.
Well, I can tell you over in Matthews, we would gladly have you. You just call me. The process is really, really quick.
Yeah.
Do you have a pair of gloves and do you have a pair of clippers? And you are welcome to come and remove lots of kudzu, a lot of wisteria, a good bit of poison ivy, but not nearly as much. Poison ivy being a native plant,
Right.
certainly causes some problems to most folks, but when it's in the middle of nowhere, we actually welcome it. What we don't want is the kudzu and wisteria and stilt grass and all this other stuff just swamping our park. So we could definitely use you as well. So feel free, but that's wonderful that you guys have that as an opportunity. And even the dog says, come and volunteer and help out. There's no question about it. Do reach out to us at hawk.org. Our Facebook page, you can find us and gladly we can give you some volunteer opportunities, and we can certainly connect you with Lenny's group as well as Meck County Park and Rec. Lenny, the questions continue, but I thank you so much. It's already well after 8, it's almost 8:30, so we're going to go ahead and close it out here. Thanks again for participating with us and presenting to us tonight. I'm sure, again, everybody has had has been saying there's a lot of thank yous and happy holidays and all that kind of stuff. So be safe, and we look forward to seeing you again at one of our others. I did want to leave everybody with one thing. We do have a certified wildlife habitat steward training that we're doing. It doesn't go available to the public for another few days, but if you're interested in hearing about that, it is about 3 full days of presentations like this from a variety of different organizations, water quality. I believe, Lenny, you're on the docket, if I remember. You're going to be presenting over at that. And so if you're a North Carolina Wildlife Federation member, you get a slight discount on it. If you're not, you pay for the presentation or for the certification classes, as well as you become a North Carolina Wildlife Federation member. So you pay a little extra, but you become a member for that little extra. Anyway, reach out, take a look at our website and our Facebook where you can learn more about that. If you're interested in it, you can reach out to us as well. Lenny, thanks again. I really appreciate you coming and speaking with us. And to everybody on the presentation tonight, happy holidays, happy new year, and we'll see you next year. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Happy holidays, everybody.